Firstly, I'm just really glad that everyone showed up to come and see these young boys, these amazing faces. And the whole idea of it was mainly to use research around happiness and public health to kind of empower young boys, especially 13-year-old boys, who, based on research, shows that that age particularly is where young boys are at a cognitive stage where they're able to take in new information and actually enact that in their behavior. So that's why I focused specifically on year 9, to be able to use the research that I conducted by exploring happiness in 5 different countries. So the top 5 happiest countries in the world, I did some research, and then created these creative art workshops, which were based upon the 8 principles of happiness. And the whole idea of it is to provide tools for these young boys to be able to navigate their experiences, to be able to talk about what it feels like for them as young black boys, young boys of Asian minority backgrounds, to explore in a space that is safe for them, to actually talk about what it's like to be a black boy, to be an Indian boy, Pakistani, whatever, in that space. What does it feel like? What are the challenges that you face that nobody else understands? And actually, how can you learn tools that can help you navigate that? But also from a bigger picture, to challenge the society to think about what more needs to be done to listen to these young boys, to put things in place, to specifically support the development of these young boys, to circumvent them for what supposedly looks like an inevitable pathway for a lot of them. And one of the things that often people say to me when they see all these images of young black boys is, oh my God, like, it looks so amazing, but I'm so used to not seeing it. And that in itself speaks a lot about why there was a need for me to change what people are used to seeing. Because most people, when you ask them what are the first kind of couple of snapshots of what you see when you think of black boys, most people think about mugshots, stabbings, victims of or perpetrators within that. But actually, what else? Most of us, as you said, you see Sean like that every day, but when he goes out, most people don't assume that that's what Sean is about or that's how he looks. There is a perception that precedes Sean, or Tia, or Andrew, or most of these other young people. And that's why, for me, from a visual perspective, it was important to really, at the end of this project, challenge what people are used to seeing, especially even in some cases, like in this case, the teachers, who are used to working with these young boys a lot, and maybe have a different idea or perception because there's a version of those young boys that they only see in the classroom. But actually, when these boys were in this session, they were able to show a different side, which was because there was no judgment in that space. There was a facilitation that enabled them to be honest, to be open, to say things that maybe they would never say to anybody else. And believe me, they did say a lot of those things, which I'm not going to share with a lot of parents and people like that. But what was really important was they felt safe enough to do that to somebody that also was on that journey with them. I tried to create a space that was non-hierarchical, that allowed the young people to explore, to challenge me, to talk about the things that they're going through and what I'm going through, and to actually provide tools that allow them to take lessons that they could enact in their everyday. And it's so interesting when one of them talked about the fact that he doesn't need to listen to because he's a child. And that's such an interesting thing because there's an oversight. Because a lot of people think because you're 13, you don't actually have valuable opinions and thoughts. And little do you know, when we started to discuss about so many different things, the intricate thoughts that a lot of these young boys have about politics, about society, about religion, about the world. And actually, I learned so much by listening to them. And it's something, again, that this project is so important to be able to teach us adults to actually listen more and to actually give these young people the same respect that we hope that they give to us. Because in that way, it becomes a mutual transaction of knowledge. And that's one thing I've learned in this period of working with these young people, that a lot of them are much smarter and wiser than we actually give them credit for. And actually, when we start to listen to these young people's experiences, especially when we talk about freedom, some of them talk about how they're perceived in the society and how they don't feel free when they step out of the house. A lot of these boys are 13. Well, actually, when they step out on the streets, people look at them like they're a big man. People act towards them as though they're a threat. They're going to jack them. They're going to rob them. They're going to all these other things. So actually, they have to wear this armor that's devoid of these looks that you see. And that's why these looks are so important, because actually, this is who they maybe really are every day, but they're forced to cloak these looks because when they step out, people don't expect them to be these guys. People expect them to be the guy that's either trying to rob them, or probably, as Andrew was saying, when he's in the shop, the way people look at him, the way people follow him about. Then all of a sudden, would you question that child's behavior if he changes from being Smiley to being something else? And that's a question for all of us in society and other institutions that we might work in. How much are we doing to try and change the culture and how we engage with young people from these backgrounds, and how much are we challenging people in our spaces, in our institutions? It's not just enough to say we're not racist, because it's much bigger than that. It's about what else can be done within the institution to challenge the status quo, the unconscious biases, the conscious biases, and actually the ways in which we engage with these young people. Because again, I do a lot of work in prisons, in PRUs, in mainstream education. So just think about, the overwhelming percentage of the young people that end up being in prison. They are mostly this population. And the young people that go into PRUs, it's not a coincidence. A lot of young people that end up being in exclusion units, it's also not a coincidence, because the education system needs to do much more than just saying we're providing access for everybody. Because there's some things that highlights, especially through this project, that this demographic are being done a disservice in the way that education currently is. And for these young people's pathway to be inevitably circumvented from being on the streets or being in gangs, that's why this project is more preventative. It's about trying to provide the tools for these young people to be able to understand the society they exist in, but also understand how they have agency over the things they can change. But the whole element of these visual parts of it is to challenge then the society, to think what things can you change to make these young people's lives also better. So it's like a mutual dual work process. One of the things that really inspired this project was because I saw there was a rise in youth violence, especially black boys were really dying because of stabbings. And most of the proposed solutions were increased criminalization, more stop and searches. And again, because I work in the prison, I know that these things don't deter young people from going to actually commit crimes. So I needed to look at a public health approach that was more preventative and trying to impact these young people much younger from a perspective that is devoid of increased criminalization, but actually understanding that there's a public health approach to how we can also tackle this. There's no secret that there are so many things that are actively working against the progression of these young people. And until we actively make the choices to start to change the way things are running within those institutions, sadly, there's still going to be an increased level of youth violence, there's still going to be an increased level of murders, until we make those active changes. And one of the reasons why it's so important, especially with boys, is because boys are not socialized to be able to actually support themselves mentally and emotionally. They are socialized to just keep it in, put on this stoicism, and step into the world like it's okay, I'm calm, everything's cool. But actually, it's not the case. And until we start to put things in place to support these young people to be able to speak, articulate themselves, and provide support for them, then we are not going to see the change that hopefully, I believe, is possible to see.